Somewhere in Europe, long before telephones, emails, or nervous people typing "seen" into tiny glowing screens, a horse moved slowly through the snow. Its rider said nothing. The road ahead was dark, wet, and nearly invisible beneath winter fog. Trees leaned over the path like silent listeners. Every few minutes, the horse snorted clouds of steam into the cold night air, as if even it was beginning to question this entire journey. And honestly, fair enough. Because the man riding through that freezing darkness carried something more dangerous than a sword. A letter. Not a large letter. Not even a heavy one. Just a few folded sheets of paper sealed with wax. But in the royal courts of Europe, a letter could start a war faster than an army sometimes could. Especially if it arrived at the wrong castle. Especially if the wrong person opened it first. And especially if the sender belonged to a royal family that absolutely hated the family receiving it. Which, to be fair, described most royal families. The writer kept one hand close to his coat the entire journey. Hidden beneath layers of wool and fur was a leather pouch tied tightly against his chest. Inside rested the sealed message. The wax seal pressed into the paper showed the symbol of a rival kingdom. If border guards discovered it, the messenger could disappear into a prison before sunrise. Or worse, history is full of kings who claimed to be merciful right before doing something extremely unmerciful. The wind pushed harder across the hills as the rider finally spotted lights in the distance. Castle. Tall towers rose through the fog like dark stone ships floating in the night. Torchlight flickered along the outer walls. Somewhere above, guards walked slowly along the battlements, wrapped in thick cloaks and carrying spears. Most of the castle slept, but not all of it. Royal courts never fully slept. Some servant was always awake carrying firewood. Some advisor was always whispering about taxes or war. Some nobleman was always dramatically offended by something tiny. And somewhere inside the castle, someone was waiting for this letter. Waiting nervously. Maybe even desperately. The rider approached the gate carefully. Snow crunched beneath the horse's hooves. One guard lifted a torch higher while another rested a hand on his sword. "State your business," the guard demanded. The messenger climbed down slowly. No sudden movements. In medieval politics, sudden movements could shorten your lifespan quite dramatically. "I carry correspondence," he said quietly. The guards exchanged a look. That word alone carried weight. Correspondence. A polite way of saying, "This piece of paper may ruin several lives." One guard stepped closer. "From where?" The messenger hesitated. Already a dangerous sign. Finally he answered, "From the northern court." Silence. Even the wind seemed to pause for a moment. Because the northern court and this kingdom were rivals. Not always openly at war, but never truly at peace either. The sort of relationship where people smiled during banquets while quietly planning betrayals before dessert. The guard extended his hand. "The letter." The messenger did not move. "I was ordered to place it directly into royal hands." Another silence. Longer this time. A very uncomfortable amount of silence, honestly. Finally, the older guard sighed in the tired voice of a man who had probably dealt with royal nonsense for 20 years. "Of course you were." He motioned toward the gate. The heavy wooden doors slowly opened. The messenger entered the castle courtyard beneath falling snow. And just like that, another secret crossed a border. This happened more often than most people realized. When we imagine royal history, we usually picture battles, crowns, giant paintings of angry men pointing at maps. But behind all of that was paper. Endless paper. Kings wrote letters to queens. Queens wrote letters to brothers. Mothers wrote desperate messages to sons preparing for war. Sisters warned sisters about plots spreading through court corridors. Some letters carried peace offers. Others carried threats hidden beneath beautiful handwriting. And some carried secrets so dangerous they had to travel only at night. Inside the castle, servants led the messenger through narrow stone hallways lit by candles. The floors smelled faintly of smoke and damp wool. Somewhere in the distance came the sound of a door slamming and a dog barking. The castle felt alive in that strange nighttime way. Quiet, but never truly calm. As the messenger walked deeper inside, he passed enormous tapestries hanging on the walls. Battles, hunts, victories painted in bright colors. Royal families loved decorating castles with reminders of how powerful they were. Very subtle people, royals. At last the messenger reached a smaller hallway guarded by 2 armed men. Unlike the outer guards, these men wore finer armor marked with the royal crest. One opened the door. Warmth spilled into the corridor immediately. Inside sat a woman beside a fire. Not a servant, not a secretary, a queen, or perhaps more accurately tonight, a worried sister, cousin, daughter, or mother hiding behind the title of queen. Because royal people spent much of history pretending politics was not personal while making everything extremely personal. She looked up quickly as the messenger entered. "You were followed?" she asked. "No, Your Majesty." "You are certain?" "Yes." Only then did she relax slightly. The messenger stepped forward and carefully removed the letter from inside his coat. The queen stared at the wax seal without touching it. Just looking at the symbol of that rival family seemed dangerous enough. For a moment the room remained completely still except for the crackling fire. Then finally she reached out and took the letter. A single piece of folded paper. Small enough to fit in one hand. Powerful enough to shake kingdoms. And that is the strange thing about royal history. Sometimes the fate of entire nations rested not on giant battlefields or roaring cannons, but on exhausted people reading secret letters beside candlelight long after midnight. Outside, snow continued falling softly over the castle towers. The messenger would sleep for only a few hours before beginning the dangerous ride home again. Because somewhere far away, another royal family waited nervously for a reply. And the silence between kingdoms could often feel far more frightening than war itself. If you had traveled across Europe a few hundred years ago, one thing would become very confusing very quickly. Almost every king was somehow related to every other king. Not casually related either. Not the modern kind of family connection where someone says, "Oh yeah, he's technically my third cousin," and nobody really understands what that means. No, royal families took this to a completely different level. Kings married princesses from other kingdoms. Queens sent daughters across Europe to marry foreign princes. Cousins married cousins. Uncles arranged marriages for nephews they barely knew. Entire alliances were built around weddings between teenagers who had usually met only once. Sometimes not even once, which is honestly a stressful way to start a marriage. But for royal families, marriage was not really about love. It was diplomacy wearing expensive clothes. A wedding could stop wars. Or start them. And because of these endless royal marriages, Europe slowly became one giant complicated family argument stretched across castles, mountains, and borders. One queen might be born in Austria, married into France, secretly writing letters to Spain, while her brother ruled somewhere else entirely. At family gatherings, nobody probably knew where to sit. And yet despite all these blood connections, the kingdoms still fought constantly. That is what made royal letters so strange. The people threatening each other in public were often writing affectionate private messages in secret. A king might spend the morning preparing an army and the evening writing, "To my beloved cousin." History can be deeply weird sometimes. In one palace, church bells rang for military victories. In another palace, a queen cried quietly while writing to the sister she might never see again because their nations had become enemies. This happened again and again across Europe, especially among the great royal dynasties. The mighty House of Habsburg spread their influence through marriages so aggressively that people joked they conquered Europe with weddings instead of swords, which honestly saved on armor costs. The House of Bourbon ruled powerful kingdoms like France and Spain, creating enormous networks of royal cousins. The House of Tudor turned family drama into a national crisis almost every few years. And much later, the House of Romanov would connect Russia to nearly every important royal court in Europe. Underneath crowns and ceremonies, these families stayed tied together through private correspondence. Letters became bridges between rival courts. Because sometimes blood mattered more than borders. And sometimes it absolutely did not. That depended entirely on the week. In many royal households, letter writing became part of daily life. Not casual little notes either. These messages were carefully written performances. Every sentence mattered. Every greeting carried hidden meaning. Even the way a ruler signed their name could reveal anger, affection, or distrust. The queen writing, "To my dear sister," meant one thing. Writing, "To the Queen of England," meant something very different. And everyone noticed. Royal courts were basically giant buildings full of people overanalyzing punctuation. Imagine hundreds of nobles standing around whispering. She used a shorter greeting this time. Oh no! She ended the letter without mentioning God. My heavens! Political tension could rise because somebody sounded slightly colder in paragraph 3. Meanwhile, servants nearby were probably thinking, "You people desperately need hobbies." But letters truly mattered, because traveling across Europe took weeks or months. Monarchs could not simply meet for coffee and discuss misunderstandings like reasonable neighbors. Everything moved slowly. News moved slowly. Armies moved slowly. And emotions moved slowly too. A mother in one kingdom might wait months to learn whether her daughter survived childbirth in another court. A brother might hear about a war weeks after it already began. A queen could spend entire winters isolated from her own family except through letters. So those letters became deeply emotional. Not just political. Lonely people poured their fears into parchment. Especially royal women. Princesses often left home as teenagers to marry foreign rulers. Suddenly they lived in strange castles surrounded by unfamiliar languages, customs, and suspicious courtiers. Many felt trapped. Letters became their only connection to home. One young queen wrote desperately to her mother about the coldness of her new court. Another secretly complained about her husband's terrible manners. And honestly, some royal husbands truly sounded exhausting. Several queens described endless ceremonies, endless pressure to produce heirs, and endless gossip. Imagine living in a castle where every single person watches you eat soup incorrectly for 20 years. Absolute nightmare. So sisters wrote to sisters. Mothers wrote to daughters. And hidden beneath discussions about dresses, birthdays, or illnesses were political warnings. Tiny coded messages. Do not trust this advisor. The king grows angry. There are rumors of invasion. Burn this letter after reading. That last sentence appeared surprisingly often in royal correspondence, which is never comforting. Sometimes the letters traveled openly through official channels. Other times they moved secretly. A trusted servant might hide folded papers inside clothing. A diplomat could carry messages disguised among ordinary documents. Messengers rode at night to avoid attention. And always there remained the terrifying possibility of interception, because rival kingdoms loved stealing each other's letters. Absolutely loved it. Nothing entertained royal spies more than secretly opening someone else's dramatic correspondence. If captured, a letter might be copied, decoded, or shown publicly to embarrass its sender. Wars started this way. Executions happened this way. Entire alliances collapsed because one private message landed in the wrong hands, which meant every royal writer lived with constant fear. Fear that their secrets might survive longer than they did. And many of those secrets did survive. Centuries later, historians would sit quietly in archives unfolding fragile letters written by trembling candlelight long ago. Some messages discussed armies. Others discussed heartbreak. Many discussed both at the same time, because royal life blurred together family and politics until nobody could fully separate them anymore. A cousin might also be a rival king. A beloved sister might belong to an enemy court. A mother might beg for peace while her sons prepared for war. And through all of it, letters traveled endlessly across Europe, over snowy roads, across stormy seas, through forests filled with thieves and battlefields filled with smoke. Small folded papers carrying whispers between royal families who loved each other, feared each other, and occasionally tried very hard not to destroy one another. Though, historically speaking, they were not always successful.